You know, when we do these movies, people think that, you know, these superhero movies are all of kind of one ilk, but really what they attempt to do, especially at Marvel, is they take different genres and they mash it up with their superhero world. In the case of Spider-Man Homecoming, what you had was a John Hughes film meets the Marvel superhero world. So with that in mind, part of the task is to kind of find the tone, in that case of those kind of 80s movies, The Breakfast Club, and things that we loved, to try to put it in the spirit of those, and which leads to some editing challenges and some things to keep in mind with every scene, such as one of the mantras for me was, no matter what you do, keep it young, keep it with young, positive energy, and strip out any cynicism you might see, and just let this thing exist this way. Tone is defined as the feeling of the audience while they're watching it. How are they supposed to feel? So you work these things in the editing room before the composer. I start it before the director's even involved. While they're shooting, we're experimenting to see, because the earlier you find tone, the easier it's going to be to execute the whole film. Because you can have a great story, but it feels all over the map and you don't know why, because the scenes are right. But it's because you're shifting the audience's experience in a way which they don't get on the right emotional ride. So that's why it's so important to find it. It's said in the script that they get in the car and that Toombs, the father, is eyeing him the whole time. Well, the real way this had to be put together, it had to be very exact when he starts to figure it out. And, basically she's spilling the beans. You know a scene is right when it starts to feel simple. Because this scene, there was every way to tip it off that he already knew, but it's much more interesting if the audience is sitting there saying, oh, I hope he doesn't figure it out. I hope she doesn't give it away. And then she's innocent and she's just giving it away. Editorially speaking, there's some interesting things going on here. At least half of those two shots with them in the back seat are actually split screens to get the exact right performances between him and her. So you start to do this, what we call intraframe editing, which is, and this is becoming more and more what we have to do in making movies right, which is putting things together that weren't necessarily shot together. But to get the level of accuracy you're trying to do, the specificity, if that's a word, to be exactly where you're aiming at, you sometimes have to combine things to be just right. Editors, by their very nature, are actually in the business of subtext. So you have writers writing the big story, although there's a lot that we do, especially the level I'm at, we're partners in story, where the old saying was we're the final rewrite. But more to the point, at every level, an editor is the master of subtext. And subtext is the messages that are happening, or the communications that are happening that aren't what they're saying, that are being communicated between people that have a different meaning. When he's awkwardly talking to Liz, what they're saying isn't what the scene's about. It's a complete subtext scene. It's about, I really like you, oh boy, I hope you like me, and she gives it back to him. And that's why it can be so much more interesting cutting a scene from a different point of view, from reaction shots, from different ways to communicate. If we're sitting here in this room listening to me and we were to shoot this movie, we might have a wide shot of all you people attentive, believing in this, whatever I'm trying to espouse. Or we may have a bunch of singles, close-ups, like maybe her, where she's like, God, is this guy full of it? So we shot the same scene, but the choice with the subtext is to cut to her saying, my God, what a blowhard, what a bunch of hot air. And that's the same scene, but a completely different communication. Well, that's the business of editing. That is what we do. So you say, well, you did what the director said. Well, yeah, of course we do. We all have a boss. He's got a boss, they got a boss, everyone's got a boss. But the point is that, what we do is such an important part that I always like to say, if we don't get them to the 80th percentile as editors before they even come in, we're up shit's creek. There's just too much to do. So we had to kind of figure this out. And then when we first presented, these movies are so long. The assembly of this movie was like 3.5 hours long, the very first cut. And we just had to decide, well, what is the movie inside here? And as long as that was, and we cut it down, we still then had to go shoot a couple more weeks to then make it work. So that's a process. But as the domain of the editor is this partner in storytelling, and the domain of the editor within the scene is to really hone the subtext. They're in the car together. It's not what he's saying, because basically Keaton's playing, I'm a dad, I'm just going to give a dad thing, maybe knock this kid a little off balance, because that's fun to fuck with your daughter's boyfriend. That's just universally fun. Everyone knows that. So, but then all of a sudden, his interest is piqued. So, and it's not what they're saying. It's not, they didn't tell him, by the way, he's Spider-Man or whatever. It's like, he disappeared from the party. He always disappears. And then you cut to him. That's subtext. That's what that is. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to do communications that aren't what the direct ones are. I'm right now co-cutting the Ant-Man sequel with a very accomplished big editor. So it's two of us sharing the sandbox, and we have very different feelings about this. But mine has always been the classical thing where you do an editor's assembly, every scene gets its day in court as if it's the most important scene in the movie. And then I have to psychologically, force myself to not switch, because then as soon as I switch hats, I'm deadly. I mean, I'm just like, we don't need this or that, just slash this out, But until then, I kind of have learned the hard way. I did a movie in the mid-90s where I got ahead of the process. I started doing some fine cuts very early, and what ended up happening was that the director's cut peaked at 6 weeks. It was the best movie, and then by 10 weeks, it wasn't nearly as good. So it kind of brought me to a philosophy of doing all these things to make sure I don't get ahead on any of the steps that we go through, because I know that the win isn't me getting a win early on. The win is when the movie lands just right, and it's kind of like parking a boat. So you kind of ease it in till it's just right there in the slip. Because like I said, if I, another analogy is if I tighten the lug nuts too early, if I say I make the greatest cut ever on my first pass, you know what I've done? I've precluded that from existing, because this is a collaborative art, and we all have to walk the steps together. And you have to then not only walk them together, but you have to learn to enjoy that. So I'm constantly, and I'm dealing with this because the guy I'm cutting with now is Gore's editor, who asks him to do what you just said, which is, I want to see it advance. I don't even want to come in until you've already got it way more here. And so it's like, well, your scenes are going to look one way and mine the other way, but that's what we go through. Thank you.